um, ways of mindfulness, or the way to mindfulness, it puts more emphasis on the activity of awareness, the process of awareness itself, rather than the object that we're paying attention to. So that's a kind of subtle difference, and that may become clearer as we move forward. So let's just a real brief overview of all four of these ways of mindfulness, and the first being the body, and there's a whole bunch of practices that cultivate and enhance our capacity to be mindful of the body. There's, of course, breathing. There's, of course, paying attention to various sensations in the body. Ruth led a bit of a scan this morning. There's paying attention to the postures, whether you're sitting, standing, lying down, or slumping, or whatever the posture is. And then there's all the movements, walking, dancing, brushing your teeth, going to the bathroom, whatever it might be. There's a practice called the Four Elements practice, where you explore the body in terms of earth, air, fire, and water. What are the earthy kind of feelings of the body, the more denser parts, and what about the air, water, fire, etc. There's a meditation where you pay attention to the skeletal elements of the body, feeling into them as best that you're able. There's a 32-part body meditation, and I'll read you what you pay attention to. And I did this for days on end or weeks on end in a 5-month retreat I was on, where you pay attention to the sensations of head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs, large intestine, small intestine, stomach, feces, brain, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, saliva, mucus, oil of the joints, and urine. Okay? So they're just different ways of kind of feeling into this experience of body. So that's some of what's available in that first way of establishing mindfulness with the body. Now, the second way of establishing mindfulness is feeling tone, and the Pali word for that is Vedana. And it's simply being aware of the affective tone that arises through the awareness of any activities of the six senses. Meaning that whenever you're tasting something, seeing something, hearing something, smelling something, touching something, or thinking, you could, if you paid attention, you could determine, oh, that's pleasant. That thought's a pleasant thought, or that touch is a pleasant touch. Or, gee, that's unpleasant. Or, come see, come saw. It's kind of neutral. That's feeling tone. And that comes with all our experiences through the senses. Okay? So that's the second exploration. And oftentimes in short retreats, we don't spend a lot of time spending days paying attention to the feeling tone that arises through all our senses. So the third way of establishing mindfulness becomes a little more or even more complex, so to speak, because that has to do with the mind and moods. So you've got emotions, you've got thoughts, you've got everything that's birthed through the mind, so to speak, and heart. You could say the heart too, certainly with the emotions, the heart, mind. So those are subtle activities, and the fourth way of establishing mindfulness, and we'll get into this in more depth tomorrow, is called the dhammas, contemplating the dhammas. And there's 5 classic kind of themes that you explore with the dhammas. One is the 5 hindrances. Another is the 5 aggregates, also called the 5 aggregates of clinging. 6 internal and external sense bases. The 7 factors of enlightenment, and the 4 noble truths. They've essentially, those lists, when we get into them in some detail, they look at and make us more sensitive to mental states and as to whether they lead to liberation, freedom, happiness, or whether they're leading to suffering, pain, agony, lamentation. Okay? So, broadly, when we think of the third way of establishing mindfulness, is all about the mind and emotions. They're often driven by the feeling tone of what we experience. If we like something, that can create certain kind of states in the mind. If we don't like something, there's other kind of states and moods. And then the fourth foundation just helps us see where these mental states are taking us, where they're inclining us. And then we have some options. There are skillful means. So, all right, those are the 4 ways of establishing mindfulness. But I want to talk about, this Satipatthana Sutta is so central to meditation practice and all the mindfulness practices that you find in the world. I want to talk about an element of it that really stands out. And it jumps out at you by virtue of the fact that the Buddha repeated it 13 times in this discourse. Now you got to believe, if he kind of lays the same thing out 13 times, that there's something important there that he wants his students to pay attention to. And in that discourse, it's called the refrain of the discourse. And it's just there over and over again. So the first part of the refrain goes like this. In this way, in regard to the body, in regard to feelings, in regard to the mind, in regard to dhammas, one abides contemplating the body, the feelings, the mind, the dhammas, internally, or one abides contemplating each externally, or one abides contemplating each both internally and externally. When I first heard that, I was like, years ago, I was like, well, okay, what's he trying to get at in this? But what it is, contemplating internally, we kind of get that. But contemplating externally, that's an exclamation point for the relational aspect of this practice. It's a myth that it's just, you just sit here and you work on things internally and that's what you do. Yeah, that's part of what you do. But what he's imploring his students to do, is to extend that field of awareness in these establishments of mindfulness. So it's a connecting activity. It really is. At its heart, this is very, very relational. And I remember also in this 5-month retreat, and I can still picture it now, and just close my eyes and see this guy. We were working with extending the field externally, and we were doing the skeletal meditation. And right in front of me was this monk who was also in the retreat. And I can still see his shiny bald head. And the challenge was to get quiet enough, gathered enough in the power of concentration and samadhi, feel into that person's externally, feel into that person's body, and feel the skull, the vertebrae, all the bones, day after day. So that's a very interesting part of the refrain. Internally we explore, and externally we explore. It's, it's, you know, just as important. All right, the next part of the refrain goes like this. One abides contemplating the nature of arising in the body, in feelings, in mind, in dhammas, and the nature of passing away in each, or the nature of both arising and passing away in each. All right, well, that one's kind of obvious. It's like pay attention to the impermanent nature of this creation that we're in, where everything arises and passes away. You know, to notice it, you know, that there is constant motion, internally and externally, that there's change. It's on all levels. So the Buddha's saying, well, come on, get sensitized to this. Feel the flow and all the subtleties of that flow. And that's the nature of nature. And part of our practice is learn to know when we're resisting this. It's like, I don't want to grow old. Well, there's some resistance. And if I kind of hang with that and get all tangled in it, then I'm gonna suffer. More than just the pain of getting old. You know? There's a favorite chant of mine. It's the evening prayer or chant that a lot of monasteries close down to at the end of the day, and it's aimed right at this. It goes, Anicca vata sankhara upadeva ya damino upajitva nirajanti tasam upasamo sukho. And it means all conditioned things are impermanent. They arise and pass away. Understanding this deeply brings the greatest happiness, which is peace. It's become kind of my favorite chant. All right, the next part of the refrain. There is a body, feelings, mind, and dhammas, and is established in one to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness. Bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness. Well, what does this mean? It means to establish enough connection with what's going on to recognize simply what's unfolding moment to moment without the mental commentary. That's the tricky part. To remain, to be aware of what's happening. It's a simple and direct knowing of what's present, what activity is happening, without making up a bunch of stories about it. It's a light touch. And it's pretty easy to miss the simplicity of bare knowledge, because there's a tendency to kind of look right through it or over it, or look for something special. Like, where's the special thing I'm supposed to look for here? You know, but that's a kind of misdirection. You know, but we're all often looking some expectation of something is going to happen. You know, and then we miss what's happening right in front of us. There's a story of Mullah Nasruddin, who was a crazy wisdom Sufi mystic. There's a lot of stories about him, and it seems that he was leaving his hometown and going to another country, and he seemed to be getting wealthier, and he'd have a couple, you know, donkeys with him when he'd come back, and the customs people would search his saddlebags because they're sure he was smuggling. They were just sure of it. But there was nothing of any value in the saddlebags. And so at some point, a close friend asked Mullah, he said, well, Mullah, how are you getting wealthy? And he said, well, I'm smuggling donkeys, you know. You know, and the customs people were looking for something fancy and whatever, and he was just walking these donkeys back across and then selling them or whatever. Anyway. All right, now the final part of the refrain, you hear this. One abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how, in regard to the body, in regard to feelings, in regard to the mind, in regard to dhammas, one abides contemplating each. All right, now that's the supreme challenge in practice. Not clinging to anything that arises in your experience. Experiencing fully and directly, but not grasping or pushing away. So that's really the ultimate gauntlet in this practice. Can you reduce clinging? Can you be sensitive enough to what's arising and noticing you're holding on to the pleasant things, pushing away, scrambling to push away the unpleasant? And is it possible to let go a little bit? And if you let go a little bit, you get a little reduction in suffering and a little more happiness. You let go a lot, suffering reduces a whole lot. Happiness jumps way up. So that's a little overview of the Satipatthana Sutta and that refrain which basically just lays out what's important in practice. It's talking about impermanence. It's talking about not clinging. It's talking about that kind of light touch on experience and not to get all tangled up in it. It's talking about, just a kind of careful sensing of the flow of nature. A couple other things about mindfulness I want to emphasize. That mindfulness, it never tries to change anything. That's not its job. Okay? It just observes phenomena the way it is. It's a non-interfering, non-judgmental attention. Okay? It's a very full presence, though, and it's got a great deal of subtlety and depth. It's fresh. It's alive. It has that sense of beginner's mind, seeing it for the first time. It's crisp. It's alive. Just think if we could approach the people in our lives with that, seeing them for the first time every time, not having them all boxed up and little, that person is a this and this person is a that. It's kind of bringing that presence there. It's like, who is this person? Wow. What can I learn about him that I didn't know, over the last 20 years or whatever. Okay? So, mindfulness really does make the ordinary extraordinary. That's what it does. You don't have to go on expensive vacations to exotic places. You can just eat an apple with full presence. T.S. Eliot's famous line, "We shall never cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the very first time." We shall never cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the very first time. The Buddha felt that this initial calm assessment of what's going on gives us a much better chance to act skillfully when it is time to act. So mindfulness isn't the skillful action or trying to manipulate our environment. But if our mindfulness is strong enough, when it becomes time to act, there's a good chance that we're going to act more skillfully. Okay, this first foundation, the body. It's the first foundation for a reason. The foundations, exploring them, move from the really kind of earthy groundedness of the body to the more subtle stuff of the mind and the emotions and feeling tones and the different kind of inclinations to suffering, whatever those pathways are. Buddha said this: within this fathom-long body is the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the cessation of the world. All right, what did he mean by this? I mean, to boil it down, he meant that based on his personal experience over lifetimes, if you happen to believe or are open to the Buddhist cosmology of reincarnation, that what he's saying is that the body is the perfect place for awakening. That if you put your attention right there, that's enough. That utilizing this body for the cultivation of mindfulness, can be the end-all, be-all medium for which you discover peace and freedom, awakening. Okay. Teacher of mine always used to say, you can't be overwhelmed if you have some connection with your body, no matter what the situation is. And of course, we do all get overwhelmed. Next time you're overwhelmed, and afterwards you reflect back, did I have any sense of my breathing, or the soles of my feet, or sitting in a chair, or whatever was happening? And chances are you didn't. So this is the Buddha again. In this one, he can tell he's really beating this drum about the body. There is one thing that, when cultivated and regularly practiced, leads to deep spiritual intention, to peace, to mindfulness and clear comprehension, to vision and knowledge, to a happy life here and now, and to the culmination of wisdom and awakening. And what is that one thing? Of course, you guessed it. Mindfulness centered in the body. The legendary Thai meditation master Ajahn Buddhadasa had a forest monastery. It's still there, and he's dead, but the monastery is still there. And his opening instruction to anybody who came there for a basic 10-day retreat, or admonition, the way you take it, is he'd say, do not do anything that takes you out of your body. Do not do anything that takes you out of your body. That was your first instruction. It's like, all right. So if you're to trust how important the Buddha felt this to be, and if you're to trust to some degree the lineage of teachers that have come after how important it is, paying attention right here at home is the way to go. And certainly, I notice in myself during intense times, when the press of life is really churning, and you've got teaching responsibilities, organizational duties, maybe there's a relationship issue, an illness, mine or someone close to me, or finances, whatever it is. You know the deal, the whole catastrophe. The center of attention just jumps out of the body. It just kind of does that. Just the beginning of the week, I was having a thing with an old friend of mine, and a misunderstanding, and we were trying to work it out, and I'm trying to think about this retreat and do some other projects that I'm involved in, and my mind was all over the place, and the emotions were stirred up, and on top of that, I can remember it kind of off the phone, and then in front of me is a computer, and I'm involved in these big projects, and these emails are coming in, and they ping up in the right-hand corner, and they're ping, ping, and then some of them have that annoying little exclamation point. It's like, look at me now, So, but I finally did notice, it wasn't that long a time that I was just totally out of my body, And so just simply coming back in, settling in, feeling, re-inhabiting this thing that we have, this miracle. It makes the whole situation more tenable. And then if we're spending a portion of our energy in our body, the whole of the juggling acts that we're involved in, it kind of it gets renewed with a little more grace when we're at home in the body. And we don't even need to put all our attention on somebody else. We can be kind of moving back and forth to the body very quickly. Or when we're in conversation with somebody, we can just be in the body. We don't need to be kind of flying out there. And most of the time we're thinking about what we're going to say next. Just settling back. And you therapists know about that. Many of you practice it. It's like be in the body. It enhances hearing. It enhances the whole relational field. It's the way to go. And over time, if you can begin to experience yourself as more of a mix of these body sensations and flowing emotions, and in that experience, it's a more selfless experience of this living. That enhances relaxation. And that self-referentialness kind of diminishes for a while. The ego shrinks down more of the time. And that sense of a separate embattled self is weakened. And when that happens, your ability to hear others, connect more deeply, enjoy more, of this amazing planet we've landed on is all enhanced. Over my years of teaching, I've really come to see that that connecting deeply with the body, with that way of establishing mindfulness of the body, that if that's there, all the other three foundations are so much more easily understood and explored. This practice starts at home in the body. It can stay at home in this body. And you can really trust that all the fruits of the practice will come your way. There's a tantric song that says, "Here in the body are sacred rivers. Here are the sun and moon as well as the pilgrimage places. I have not encountered another temple as blissful as my own body." I have not encountered another temple as blissful as my own body. We don't have to force our attention to when we're working. It's like awareness and the body are not two different things. Awareness is always here. And there is a lot of joy in experiencing the body. As you go through your day, you can discover that just the simple actions of this life, you'll experience, if you're paying attention there, that there's a lightness of being. Really, the reason for that is pretty simple. First, when your attention's resting in the body, well, you're not worrying about something. You're not planning. There's no remorse. You're not rehashing something. You're just living. And when it's possible to get beneath the tangle of the mind and just feel the body, there's just room there for kind of open wonder. There's room for the heart to just expand as much as it possibly can. And the heart that you all have, it's unlimited warmth and compassion. So, and this retreat, and we're going to now move into another movement session. If you look at these movement sessions and we think about the brain and how to get past kind of the defenses of the brain. Poetry is one way. It kind of somehow moves around and can touch us in a way that sometimes prose can't do. Music is another way. It just has this magic of getting past some of the defenses. And so combining the movement with the music has some we think, very interesting potential.